or actually I can probably do it, or if you want to pop up your video there, we can get started. So I'm super excited to welcome Mike Lenz. Mike is a business broker and certified value builder with Chinook Mergers, Acquisitions, and Business Brokerage. Mike has been doing this work in Victoria since 2005. Previous to that, he was a serial entrepreneur. He built a printing company in Toronto, it's my hometown, from initially 350,000 in sales to over 5 million in sales and a staff of 25 before he sold it and moved out to Victoria. Great move. Let's see if we can get you showing up there, Mike. Let's get your video rolling. There he is. Mike has the honor of, Mike has been involved in over 200 transactions, one of which was mine, we can tell you more about, with about 50 million in generated for business owners, 50 million in revenue generated for business owners through those sales. Mike has the honor of being the first person on the island to earn the designation of Certified Business Broker as awarded by the International Business Brokers Association. He is a sought-after thought leader by local media such as CFAX and some of the other local medias, as well as the Globe and Mail. Together with his colleague Keith McKenzie, they wrote a book called Getting to the Finish Line, which explores the role of many professionals that are and can be involved in the business transaction, how they are best used, and what value they add for the business owner. So welcome to the SOHO Summit, Mike, and thanks very much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. I think that's the short answer. It's really great to do these things. I like to get in front of people and chat a bit about what I've seen over the years.
Awesome. So there, I've stopped sharing my screen, so hopefully you can just see Mike and I, and we're going to have a little chat about buying and selling businesses. Probably more selling businesses, but first off, Mike, I'm just really intrigued by the session title, of course, The Business Owner's Trap. Preparing to sell your business. So can you talk to us a little bit about that? What is the idea behind the business owner's trap?
Well, I think it comes out of something that Keith and I kept looking at each other and laughing as we were writing the book, because we kept coming up against this thing is that you don't know what you don't know. And, you know, most business owners usually sell a business once in their lifetime and a few more times than that. And so they're really stuck in a place where they have no experience of what it is. And that's including what a buyer of a business is going to need to see to have the confidence to take the big plunge and, you know, spend a big pile of money to, you know, grab onto the opportunity that's done well for you, and they're hoping it will do the same for them. So there's a few elements in around there that cause that trap to be set, and usually the owners don't realize or understand what has caused the trap to be set, and we'll talk about a few of those things today.
Sure enough. Yeah, well, I alluded to the fact that we got to know each other through my experience in selling a business, and that was Social Media Camp, which I'd co-founded back in 2010. So the business was about 9 years old at the time, or 9 years running. And we had gotten to the point where we decided to sell it. And then I really didn't know how to go about that or what the process was. And in that process, found yourself and then ended up working with you guys, and then went through that experience of not really knowing kind of what the process was and what the value was. And of course, that's what most people are probably initially interested in, is what is my business worth? And then, you know, am I going to be able to sell it? So with that in mind, actually, we've got a couple of polls just to get a better sense for who's on the call and kind of where people are at. So I'm going to go ahead and launch these polls. And I want to let everyone know, first of all, that these polls are all anonymous. So when you answer the poll, nobody can see who you are. So if you have any kind of hesitation around that, rest assured that the polls are anonymous. So first of all, we just want to find out who's a business owner and who isn't on the call. So some of you may be business owners that want to sell. Some of you may be people with looking for opportunities to acquire a business, or maybe you're you're just interested in potentially creating a business at some point, and then getting it ready for sale. So it looks like about almost 70% are business owners. And so I'll leave that open for another second. Okay. And there I can share the results with you. There you can see 69% owners, 31% non-owners. And then our next poll is, so of those people, I guess, that are business owners, are you considering buying or selling a business in the next year? So most people, it looks like mostly we got sellers on the call, or people that are interested. Oh, maybe one buyer. Oh, couple. I'll leave it open for another couple of seconds there. Oh, okay, so that's an interesting split. Looks like about 63% interested in selling and 38% interested in buying. So not quite a perfectly even split, but pretty close. And here we'll do the last poll here. So for those that are interested in selling, or maybe even those interested in buying, do you think you know the value of your business? And so this is where Mike's expertise comes in handy, but kind of interesting to know as a business owner. Yeah, it looks like, oh, okay. Some more interesting results. So about 57% feel they do know the business or the value of the business. So I don't know, Mike, what's your kind of experience there? So
I would say that meets up completely with my experience of this, right?
Oh, is that right? Okay.
No, absolutely. But a little more than half of the folks that come along feel they know what the value of their business is, or have a pretty good sense of that. They might have asked their accountant. They might have found something online. They might just have a gut feeling, and some have been right. But yeah, it's an interesting thing, right? Businesses do important things to you, but there's certainly a lot of misnomers about how businesses get valued and what constitutes the value of a business. And people point to multiples. Well, I heard the multiple is this. But then there's all kinds of challenges in around, the multiple of what, and what is the definition of profit that you think this multiple is on. So there's a whole bunch of things, and then and there's a myriad of complications. I do business valuation as a fee for service for lawyers, accountants, and business owners, and it's a very interesting work because there's a lot of moving parts, right? There's a lot of moving parts in it. There's certainly some generalities which you can use to do a bit of a sanity check. We think it's such an important part of the process that we do ballpark evaluations for folks so they can get a sense of what that is, right? Because we're going to be talking about trap. Well, one of the traps is actually not having a good and reliable sense of what your business is worth, because people sell their businesses for life reasons. They're not, for the most part, very few of our sellers come along because it's a big, strategic business thing they're doing. Now they've got a life situation. They're looking to retire. They've got a new opportunity. Their spouse just got their dream job in Calgary and they need to pull up stakes and move. Illness, all kinds of things going on for folks that or they're just sick and tired. I mean, I can tell you after 12 years of humping it with my printing company, I was done. My job description was dramatically different than when I started, and I didn't like it as much. I had 25 employees, and I felt like a middle school principal a lot of the time, and so it wasn't as interesting anymore. And so plus I wanted to get out here, so I couldn't do that with my business interest in Toronto.
Hard to pick up a printing business and move it out to Victoria. Yeah.
It's tougher to visit the clients on the regular basis they require. But anyway, it's those life decisions, and it's hard, and all those life decisions kind of have a price tag on them, right? And so without that knowledge, it's really tough. And I mean, in the case of retirement, I always tease, you're going to find out if you're actually going to get the condo in the Turks and Caicos, or are you going to be on the trailer in the Baja? And if you're not happy with the trailer in the Baja, what are you going to do to get yourself into that condo?
Well, that's, I mean, you bring up an interesting point. And of course, having gone through the process myself, initially, we had no idea, but then, and if you're not in the business, why would you know, right? So you read a bit of Entrepreneur Magazine or this or that, and you hear things about multiples and you think, oh, okay, yeah, well, my revenue is X. It should be worth 3 times revenue. But then depending on what the profit margin is, that may make no sense at all. And then depending on the person's life situation or different motivations, or whether you're working with a partner or not, there's all kinds of considerations.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So with that in mind, do you find that given the current situation that we're in with the pandemic and that effect on the economy and business and so on, is that having an effect on people's kind of motivation to either buy or sell? Are people looking for opportunities now? Are more people motivated to sell, even if they were thinking, they had another 5 or 10 years in them?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've spoken to people who are feeling pressured to sell because they can't afford, and they're hoping there'll be some type of lifeline for a little bit of cash, as opposed to them crumbling utterly under the weight of how the pandemic has changed their business model. I was on the phone with a gal yesterday, and I've been working with her for a little while, and she had her revenues up 15%. She had smoothed out a lot of the processes of her business. She got rid of the hub and spoke trap. We'll talk about that one in a bit. She was really pumped, and things were going great. And she was going to call me and say, "I think I got it ready to sell, Mike." And then her revenues went down to 20% of what they were. Because she has a business that requires people to come, and that was taken away from her. I have some buyers that have come along thinking there's going to be great buying opportunities. I've had buyers come along thinking that the businesses should be discounted based on the last 3 months of performance. And I asked the question, are you buying this business for 6 months or 6 or 12 or 15 years? Like, how long, is the life of a business, right? And, we're not the sum value of our worst months. That's a bit of an unfair evaluation. And if you're that afraid that the world will never come back to a point where this business will work again, then you shouldn't consider buying the business.
Well, with that in mind, there was one line in the description of the event today that I found particularly intriguing. So maybe we could talk about that. But you'd mentioned their beginning and working with the end in mind is the key to completing the cycle of business ownership and exit your business with grace, style, and a handsome financial reward. So how does a business owner, either if they've been going for 5 or 10 years, or they're I guess fairly new, but they have the sale of the business as a potential exit strategy, maybe 5 or 10 or 15 years down the road, how do they craft or kind of mold the business so that it is sellable and it's not based on them?
So this really points to the biggest of the various traps that are set, and that is most business owners, and this goes to Michael Gerber, the business consultant who built the empire on the E-Myth book, and he has a huge consulting practice in and around that. But the idea that the business owner is not an entrepreneur, and when we say entrepreneur, not a person who is a business person per se, and their savvy is in around how businesses operate and how they work. What they tend to be is they're the best technician, right? They are the best baker, they're the best mechanic, they're the best salesperson, they're the best what have you, and they get tired of working for, and making money for other folks, and they put their shingle out and start their own business. But their expertise is in being the technician, being really good at providing whatever service product that they are selling. And because they're good, they tend to keep doing things. And they get very, very involved in the business. And before they know it, their business looks like a wheel. And this is the trap that we call hub and spoke. And the idea that your business is a wheel. And so the outer, perimeter of the wheel is what, meets the road, and that's held up by the spokes. In this analogy, the spokes of the wheel are the various aspects of business operation: sales, HR, supply side, finance, and on it goes. All those things, marketing, advertising, all of those things being the spokes of the wheel, reaching out to the perimeter. And of course, they are moored into the hub. Now, we all know from reading Popular Mechanics or somewhere that if you take the hub out of a wheel, it has to collapse because there's nothing holding those spokes out. And that business owner is the hub. So all of those spokes are run through the efforts of the business owner because it's their business, and off they go and they do it. And they have success doing that. What tends to happen is that, my school bus had what was known as a governor on the engine. So it could only go 55 miles an hour. That's the fastest that thing would go. And so unbeknownst to the business owner, they put a governor on it as well, because it's only as much as they can do scrambling up and down each one of those spokes to keep their business going, to make it continue. And so it can only grow so big, we see. And the other challenge then is for someone to buy it, they need to be just as adept at all those various things. And very often in those spokes are also these very personal relationships with the various people, the customers and suppliers in particular, that entrap the owner in so much as the new person who might buy it is concerned that they'll be able to replicate those relationships and to continue on doing all those things. So you want to remove, beginning with the end in mind, figuring out, yeah, okay, I got to get this thing started, and sure, that initial effort, for sure, 100%. But at some point, you need to make the decision, okay, I'm going to start easing myself out of this business and giving up some of these things to good procedures and processes that are documented, that my staff can execute.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was something that was certainly true of the business that I sold, the Social Media Camp, initially when we started, when Paul Holmes was my partner, when he and I started 10 years ago. To be honest, we didn't really have a long-term plan, and I wasn't thinking about building up something to sell. But the first couple of years were really, I think that we played a really big role in it, and it was almost like the Chris and Paul show to a certain degree, even though it was named Social Media Camp. But I really wanted to get away from that. I wanted it to stand on its own and be its own event, and not, and so we even took lesser roles in the actual hosting of it and brought in professional MCs and so on. It was a bit kind of grassroots from the beginning, but it became more professional. And as it grew, it was just known as Social Media Camp, and it got more of an international awareness and so on. And Paul and I really took a back seat, and we had a professional management company. So I feel like we sort of did that right, because I didn't want us to be key to the success of the event. And so, I don't know, you can, it ended up.
You'll recall, Chris, you'll recall how many times we were asked during the process, how's it going to do without you guys, right? Yeah. And that's always the suspicion, is that you have some secret sauce, some magic that you do, this voodoo that you do so well that no one else can replicate. And that becomes, a great hurdle. I mean, over my right shoulder there is my father's construction sign. He was a plasterer by trade and a wonderful craftsman. That business does not exist. Yes, it's a business, but it doesn't exist without my father, because and he was particularly known for doing, fancy work. There was only a few guys in the city of Kitchener-Waterloo, where I grew up, that had his type of skill, and he was kind of known as the guy. And, you can't, that's not replicable. Mm-hmm. He did try for a time to have a whole bunch and do, bigger buildings, small apartment buildings and such, and hire people, but he found that completely wearisome, trying to manage all that staff, and then quickly shrunk back down to just being a tradesman, a craftsman, mm-hmm. right? And that's kind of where a lot of these owner-operated businesses teeter, right? On that, it's a whole nother thing to manage a business versus going out and doing what you do well for people on your own, which is also a business.
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting. When we started the process with you, and it did take, I guess, about a year. So that's another maybe interesting question, is timing and so on. But we weren't really sure what to expect, and it was interesting. The tire kickers, I guess, or whatever, the people that were interested that came through, all the questions that they asked, and that was certainly a common one, was how much does success of the event hinge on the owners. So with that in mind, how do you have some advice or tips or how the current seller can help ensure the success of the new business owner, both before they actually sell? So instilling that confidence in them that they will be successful, and then even afterwards, does that, I guess, contract anything can be written into a contract, but there is potentially a period of time when they stay on to ensure success and on the transition of ownership and so on. So maybe you want to speak to that a little bit. And just before you get into that, I just wanted to remind people that there is the Q&A function. So if you do have any questions for Mike, please pop it into the Q&A, and then we can get to that either kind of during the session or at the end. But down in the toolbar is the Q&A. So.
Yeah, I think the first, one of the first things to embark on is actually documenting how your business runs. And you can even just start as a stream of consciousness document. You don't need to get particularly fancy. I actually, I sold a business for a couple here in town, and they're very good business operators. This was a secondary business that they had purchased to help their main business, as it turned out. But then they went and fixed that business. And the way they fixed it was they really systematized and became very organized about how the business ran. And, the previous owner was a real seat of the pants kind of person. And so I actually, with their permission, I stole their table of contents for the policy and procedure manual that they put together to kind of give people guidelines of things to think about, because they'd done such a good job. I can also tell you that in the matter of 3 years, they quadrupled the value of the business they bought just through doing that. And they made it, they frankly made it more predictably profitable and easier to run. Those are kind of the two things that come out of this process. So that's kind of the first thing, and to develop that way so that, things are teachable and repeatable in your company. Right. So if someone, falls off their bike and is off work with a concussion, someone else can come in easily and take over that role because it's well-defined, and there's a resource for them to move forward, and you don't have to babysit them there and the entire training process, and that training process, becomes quicker. All those types of things, putting those into place. What was the question, Chris?
Yeah, it was what can the business owner do to ensure that they can instill confidence in the prospective buyer in terms of their success?
Yeah.
And then, so you spoke to that already and answered that, and then.
Okay. This is a good jump off point. I've got a little one-page flyer, let's call it, for lack of a better word. One of the things that I offer to business owners, and you didn't have to wait to the entire end of this, is on our website, you can go and do a value builder questionnaire. And a value builder questionnaire looks at 8 elements of your business's operations, kind of from a 30,000-foot view, to get a sense of how you perform in those areas against like businesses. And you get a score. And we know from 40-odd thousand people who have done this, how your score influences the price you might expect for your business. So it's a good way of taking a quick look. And when you do this questionnaire, we produce a 27-page report that looks at those various things and give you some feedback about things that you might consider doing. And I even offer, for people who do it, I even offer some of my own personal time to walk through it a bit with them to kind of help their thinking of how to use that information that they just got. So I'm going to do the share screen thing now.
Okay.
And that thing. And share. There we go. So you should see my cursor here flying around. So the first one is financial performance, and that, obviously seems kind of obvious. Yeah, if you got good sales and good profitability, people will like it. But it's more than that. It's also the quality of your record keeping, right? Make them clean. Less questions is better. We know that privately held companies are not boastful when it comes to tax time. And so, Fred is doing that with his accountant. They're doing the books up, and the accountant, they're finding a few ways that are reasonable to reduce the tax load by not showing as much profit. And so things get entered into the books that benefit Fred personally, but are not necessary for the operation, and it lowers the value of the business. And so when Fred goes to sell the business, then he starts, needing to point out all those things, right? So it's a good idea, particularly in the penultimate year of you selling your business, is not to do that. Go ahead, be a little bit more boastful, pay some tax. It'll help you in the long run. Next thing people want to see, what's the obvious growth potential, right? Business buyers, much like sellers, are also creative people, and they want to see that there's an opportunity for them to move this business along, so that they didn't just take over and someone handed them something, that's all that happened. They want to see a kind of clear path to what's available going forward. And it's a good thing to do to understand where your growth lies, even while you're still running it. It kind of will help inform some of your decisions as you go. Then we get to Switzerland structure. Switzerland structure is a curious word, but it's really based on how dependent you are, as it says there, on that one employer, one employee, or one customer, or one supplier. We had a very well-known business in this town that we were working with, but they had a very limited supply chain. And we were unable to do a deal at that time because of that limited supply chain. And had they lost that small supplier or small, very shallow suppliers that could provide what he was selling, the business would disintegrate. And that became a problem trying to sell it. So he's since gone back, he's retrenched, and interestingly enough, he had just called me this week to say, I'm ready, let's do this again. Teeter-totter valuation, yeah. This is about how much money your business requires to actually operate. So in the case of a retail store, we understand you got to buy all that inventory, otherwise there's nothing in the store. But it also is about how you use your money, how quickly you get paid for things, how many things you have to pay for before you see the money, the kind of terms you're getting to your customers. And what it ends up being is, your business is kind of worth $500,000, but you got to have another $300,000 just to run the darn thing. So now all of a sudden you really have an $800,000 business to work, and so you become less attractive to a buyer against another business that they might be looking at that in fact is more efficient with their money, and it's a $500,000 business, but it really only needs another $50,000 or even nothing beyond that to operate well. Mm-hmm. Recurring revenue is a really big thing. In fact, there's a book called The Automatic Customer, written by John Warlow. John Warlow is actually also the guy responsible for this whole value driver program. Very interesting fellow. And he says he believes that every business has an ability to develop some recurring revenue. And obviously, this is really attractive. There's a reason why you don't go to Staples anymore to buy your Microsoft Office, right? It's now all subscription-based, and because the money just keeps coming, just keeps rolling. And that's very desirable. And there's many different ways of implementing something like that. And I won't go into it today because that's another entire.
Yeah, well, I should point out that all of these things that you're talking about are things that when we had our initial meeting and once we got into it, you kind of reviewed all of these things with us. And we took some time to take your advice and work on some of these things to make sure that we had all the right pieces in place before we kind of, had the open house, so to speak, and open.
And everybody that's on this call is already ahead of the curve because they're actually thinking ahead of the time. I mean, I can tell you, I have notes in my CRM from business owners I talked to in like 2008. I'm thinking of one right now in my head, and they said, no, Mike, I'm not ready to sell right now, but call me in a couple of years because I think I'm going to be ready by then. I really want to sell this thing. Mm-hmm. And they don't need any help. No, I'm good. They still own their business. I talked to that particular fella not so long ago, and he said, well, yeah, maybe I should have, done some of those things, but then he still decided not to. And so it's like, okay, whatever. We call it the great Ferris wheel of business, right? And Ferris wheels are funny. They don't always stop when you're at the bottom. They sometimes just go through and then, I'm up to the top again. But yeah, taking that time to put some of these things in place. And a lot of these things really don't cost much money at all, but they make a big difference in terms of allowing people to have the confidence required to business. I often tease people who come in to talk to me about possibly selling their business, and I say, well, I got to confess that I don't actually sell businesses, and they get a bit concerned when I say that. But I can sell you a can of beans. I'm pretty sure I can convince you to try a different brand of beans once. But selling a business is a bit bigger deal. And I can't actually convince someone to buy a business. What I can do is anticipate the types of things that will frankly give them fear. They're fearful. They're going to spend a lot of money, usually all the money they can, to buy a business. And they want to make sure they get it right. So anything that they see that would erode that confidence or give them pause, we need to remove ahead of time. And that's really the role. And a lot of these things help in doing that. Just move through these quick here, looking at the time. Monopoly control, absolutely interested. What's the competitive field like? How do you fit in? How do you compete? Those types of things. Can you even measure your monopoly? When I bought my printing company in Toronto so many years ago, was it 99, something like that? 91, no, 91. Oh, I'm getting old, Anyway, when I bought that, what I didn't know at the time is that Toronto at that time had more print capacity per capita than any city in North America. And wow. So this tiny little postage stamp of a printing company that I bought, was really kind of a nothing in the grand scheme of things. But what are you going to do? I was really sick of working for corporate Canada, and the business owner was willing to give me terms that I could afford to buy the business. Funny thing about terms, they say, your terms, my price, my terms, your price, right? So I ended up paying a big price because I couldn't give him very good terms. So he gave me terms I could use and got a really big price.
Right. I guess you can't be pulling all the levers.
Well, that's the whole thing. It's a give and take, right? We land in the middle ground, right? That's why my title is a business intermediary, right? My job is, there's two islands out there in the water. One is the buyer and one is the seller, and I throw a rope around a stump on both sides and try to pull them together by helping them understand that there's the stuff in the middle that we can remove from being scary ocean into some land they can all stand on, and put together a deal. And that's why it's interesting working with professionals, and it's so important working with professionals because they really they really approach it from being on in one camp or the other, right? And so they really have a very singular view of whoever their client is. We talked about valuation earlier. I giggle every time I think about it, but I had an accountant that I initially worked with on the buy side, and he just couldn't say enough bad things about how overpriced this business was. And it was only a couple of years later that I was working with him, and he was now on the sell side, and we couldn't possibly get enough money for that business because you know how valuable this business is? And it was hilarious. And I pointed that to him. He said, yeah, well, I'm working for my client. and my viewpoint of the work that I do is I work to get a deal. The sad truth is only about 20% of the businesses that you might see are out there for sale will ever sell. That's the reality of it. I can tell you, we turn down more folks than we work with, just simply because we don't believe they're a saleable business. And
okay. So that's not necessarily a stat in terms of 20% of all businesses actually sell, or is it that? Yeah.
That's what we know anecdotally. There's no, there's no official, I was going to say suppository, but that'd be the wrong word. But there's no official place to put all that information. It's not like it's public available information.
True.
But the fact is, most businesses don't sell, and look, very often it's kind of a last-ditch effort that the lease is coming up, and they're hoping they might be able to sell before the lease comes up, and they can't renew the lease because the business isn't doing well. Of course, that one's not going to sell, right? Mm-hmm. So there's certainly a lot of pretty tough stuff in there. Mm-hmm. But even through our vetting process, our success rate in our office is about 80%, something like that, which is extremely high. But like I said, we usually don't take them on. Mm-hmm. And the other challenge is how long. There's 9 to 15 months is the expectation for most of these owner-operator type of businesses, right? What we used to call mom and pop shops, we now call Main Street businesses, right? And that's kind of the expectation.
Yeah, interesting that you say that. I can't remember what our initial expectation was. I don't know if I had an expectation, but I suppose I was hoping maybe it might be about a 6-month process, but our sale ended up taking about, I think it was 12, 13 months, which I guess, yeah, you say is about average.
Buyer, right? Once we had our buyer,
yeah,
then it's only another 6-8 weeks.
Yeah, and then there's a lot of due diligence. Yeah, so I was a little bit surprised at that, but
that's a lot of work. Yeah.
But looking at it from the other side, if I was going to buy a business, yeah, I'd probably be the buyer from hell, because I'd have all kinds of questions and I'd want to get right into the nitty gritty, and that's that's to be expected, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Just anecdotally, also, I wanted to mention that some of these things you've talked about, and especially systematizing the business, is something that I guess most business people probably think they're good at, and some are better than others. And certainly we thought we had a pretty good system, but we took that advice to heart and systematized and documented everything that we were doing, because it is a very much, and this is probably true of any business, but it was something that you really could document. This is how you put on a conference. This is how you promote it. This is how you get the speakers. This is all the follow-up, et cetera. These are all the other kind of complementary or supplementary revenue streams, because it wasn't just about the conference. There was other revenue streams as well, and lots of opportunity there. But what I wanted to say is that, so that worked well, but then I've also implemented some of that advice into my other businesses, so BWest and SOHO as well, hopefully with it'll make them more valuable for potential sale at some point, but more so just to make them more efficient in their actual operation day to day now. So that's
what I say about all these things and implementing them is, yeah, fine and dandy. It's going to, hopefully give you a better value on your business, a bigger price tag on your business when you come to sell it. But in the interim, it should make your business more predictably profitable and easier to operate. That's my little slogan, because it just is, right? When I started that printing company and bought it, there was 3 employees, including me. And when I sold it, there was 25 employees, not including me. And you bet we had, trying to deal with that, I had learned through, skin knees, that, you've got to put things in place. And because you have to give up control of things in order to grow. And in order to do that, if you want to have your vision of how things should operate be maintained, well, you need to be able to communicate that to folks. And you're not always going to be there beside them to communicate that. So you keep working on making it easier for them to understand how you're going to go, both through the written word, so they understand that and they're trained properly, and then through how you communicate with them through meetings or whatever else you do, to keep that moving in that direction.
Now, one other thing that I found really interesting, and this is from a different perspective, in that as BWest Interactive, the company where we do marketing and so on, one of our clients, we had been working with them for about 8 years. She owned a fitness center, kind of a private fitness center, was quite successful. I think she'd owned it for maybe 10 or 15 years. And one day I got an email from her saying, hey, I've sold the business. I guess she didn't want to tell me leading up to it for privacy reasons and so on. So I got the email saying, hey, I've sold the business. Here's the new owner. Not sure if he's going to want to carry on with you or not, but wanted to make the introduction. And so I had the introduction. I ended up meeting the new owner, and we did carry on working with them. And so I let the new owner know about some of the things that we were doing, and he had no idea. Obviously, he knew there was a website, but there was all kinds of other stuff in place, lead generation, online advertising that we were doing, and he didn't know anything about that. And I thought, well, it was a bit unfortunate, because I think there was lots of added value there to the business that she probably could have. They're kind of digital assets, they're not physical assets, but there's got to be a certain value to those, because certainly from a marketing perspective, it was that she didn't ask for the value of. And luckily, at least she introduced us, because otherwise the new owner would have not known about all this other value that he had in the business that he now had access to. So I don't know if you find that,
well,
but
I'll speak to that. Yeah. So the value in what you're talking about there is in its ability to assist the new owner, in driving more revenue and profit. That's where the value lies, right? So what's interesting is if you had a pizza company, you were selling pizza, Chris's Pizza. Everybody knows Chris makes a great pizza. Chris does about, $500,000 in revenues. He puts about $100,000 into his jeans. And he's going to go out and he's going to sell his business, and he might get $250,000, $300,000 for his business. Great.
Nice.
Now, Chris's buddy, Ed, he competes with Chris. He's got a franchised pizza operation. Does about the same amount in sales. Profit is just a hair less, but he's actually going to sell his for $300 or $350. He's actually going to get a little bit more money for his business. Well, how come? Well, there's perceived value in the brand and the systems and procedures that a very disciplined franchise has, right? And that's why franchises do tend to trade for a little higher multiple than private brands. But the real reason that the price can be bigger goes back to this whole notion of return on invested capital, right? So a business is an investment. And so when private investment groups and private equity groups, they come along, they have targets of what they want to see back for the money that they invest into a business. And that's how they evaluate a price on a business. And in that effort, right, they have a certain risk profile they'll put on the business. Now, if they can lower that risk profile, then they can have a lower expectation of that return on invested capital because it's safer, right? If you put your money into a Tangerine savings account right now, I think it's 2.8%. Warren Buffett says if you're a decent stock buyer, you should make 6 to 7% if you're good in the markets. And I can tell you that pigs and pegs, they're often looking around 35% on that business because the perception of risk is much higher on small business, which was completely fascinating to me. It really seems to me, and I can tell you very often I get phone calls from buyers who would like to buy a business that they don't have to operate because they understand the return is so much better. Right? But most businesses require someone to operate them until you can get into something that's much bigger and has an operational team of high quality in place. And the purchases are really being done from a boardroom level as opposed to an operational level.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate the story there, and I don't know if you saw the Q&A question that came in, but it relates to it. Yeah, someone is asking how do franchises fit into this, and are they harder to sell? So you had sort of in your story started to answer that.
Yeah, touch on franchises for a second. So franchises are very interesting. A lot of franchises resell, 5-10 years down the road for less money than it costs the owner to open them. And this is why. Let's take, I don't want to pick on anybody, let's pick on somebody. UPS stores. UPS stores, there's a bunch of them around. The older model, they wanted a bigger footprint because they wanted printers and all kinds of other stuff. So they were looking for a bigger footprint. They were pretty expensive to build out because you got those mailboxes and they want a certain quality of counter and all those types of things. So, business owners were spending $400,000 or $500,000. You got a franchise fee as well to open their, UPS store. And I've worked with a bunch. And then they come along to me and now they show me a business that makes the owner $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, a modest living, frankly. And I can't take a business, even if it is a franchise, to the marketplace and get that much money for that business. Because if they're going to spend $500,000 on a business, they're probably going to look at a business where the owner is making close to $200,000. Well, you're now not very attractive. On the great business dance floor, you're going to be standing against the wall while, the business buyer walks up and asks for a dance with someone that's standing beside you. Because it's such a disparity. But if you're doing well, as long as I slag somebody, I should praise somebody. We've had some Panago pizzas that do very well, and there is good appetite for them because they are buyers have a lot of confidence in their ability to continue.
It's a known commodity.
So they're making decent money for the owners, $150,000, $200,000. So they do better. Mm-hmm. And it's as simple as that. But you are, as a franchise, when you go to resell, you are going to be evaluated based on the kind of money that you're making. So even if you get a bit of a premium because you're a franchise and you're, again, more predictably profitable, but you're only so profitable. And so you still are going to be assessed based on your financial performance, your business performance per se, as opposed to when you bought the franchise and it was, look what might happen. And you're really kind of sold, you're sold on what's going forward. And we very much assess businesses on what happened for the most part. We see different things in high tech and in high tech sales and stuff. We hear the crazy multiples that Google will pay for a company because they are looking forward. But we actually, what we say in the Main Street level is that people pay for the past, but they buy for the future, right? So you as a business owner, if I tease that if a business owner prospect comes in and uses the word potential more than 4 times in the first 3 minutes of the meeting, I end the meeting, right? Because I don't sell potential.
Right.
I sell a belief that it can continue, right? Because of good reasons. But, if you didn't maximize or take advantage of all these potential things that this business could do, why should someone else believe you, much less pay for that?
It's a good point. Well, I'm glad I only used the word potential 3 times in our first meeting then.
You were getting right up there. You almost, the glass almost spilled, but then you stopped.
Well, with that said, we've got a couple more questions coming in. So maybe if you want to stop sharing your screen, and then we'll just go to the Q&A. Awesome, thanks. So a follow-up question came in, and I'm not sure if this relates specifically to the franchise, but it says, how about if there are no bricks and mortar? So we can maybe get someone to follow up on that if there's clarity needed. But if it's a franchise and they're not a brick and mortar franchise, does that make much of a difference?
Yeah, again, depending on which franchises it is, because obviously people believe in some franchises and barely know the name of other franchises. So you've got that going on. Bricks and mortars is not an impediment to selling a business. As you will attest to, Chris, you had no bricks and mortars that went with Social Media Camp. I have a vacation property rental business up for sale now. They run it out of, one of the rooms in their house, right? They don't need to spend a lot of money on lease. And we're going to see a lot more non-bricks and mortar businesses, even in the retail sector, where some people have, identified that lease as a great big anvil that is tied around their neck with a beautiful weighty chain. And we're seeing a lot of shifts in what's going to happen in the retail world. There's no doubt of that. It's been coming, but now it's been exacerbated and maybe sped up by the pandemic. So yeah, that's not an impediment by any means. Lots of viable and profitable and good businesses don't have bricks and mortar.
Another question came in, and I'm not sure I understand this one, so maybe we can get some clarification. But the question is, what is the ideal business you are looking to sell, and based at what value range? So,
well, I can talk to that, Chris.
Okay.
I can talk to that. Yeah. So, for me, I like them. The more value, the better. The bigger price, the better, because it's virtually the same amount of work to sell, a business for $1 million as it is to sell one for $200,000. The most Main Street business buyers, they come in and they have between $50,000 and $100,000 of liquid cash to buy a business. So that really limits what they can do. And when we work with buyers, we ask them, how much money do you have and how much money do you need to make? Not what do you want to make. We all want to make $1 million a month. I understand that. But what do you need to make, right? To keep your life going forward. And those things need to line up, because if you don't have enough money to initiate the transaction, then you can't go there. There is a real sweet spot in terms of still lots of buyers and businesses that look to provide a good living for folks. For businesses that sell kind of between $300,000 and $500,000, there's a big swath of a lot of people can start there, so. The kind of bottom line for earnings for me to start to feel comfortable that I'm going to have a good chance to sell the business. Obviously, there's a lot of other factors that play into this, but the kind of number one start is there's $100,000 of earnings for the owner, right? Because less than that, it becomes very difficult to, let's look at it this way. A buyer needs to achieve three things for what we call a financial buyer. So that's someone who's going to be the new owner operator. First of all, they need to make some type of living wage, right? Back to the what do you need to make, not what do you want to make, right? Secondly, they need to pay for any of the loans, need to service those loans that they took on to purchase the business. So that's got to. And lastly, they need to see some type of return on investment. Now, sometimes that return on investment is just actually paying off the loan, so that now they have the value of that business, and that's part of the calculation, because there's not a lot left over once they took their living wage out and paid for the loan. But all that has to happen inside of what the company makes. Right? So when a company makes, $60,000, $70,000, well, it's hard for someone to say, oh, I'm going to support my family on $60,000 and $70,000 with this business, and still pay money for the business, and well, now they can't get a loan because there's no money left over, and so all those things really make a downward pressure. That's why we see that $100,000 is really kind of a minimum. Things get much sweeter once it gets up above 150. Then things start to get way more comfortable, and then we get institutional financing becomes easier, and a bunch of things like that start to fall into place.
Well, that's a good lead into the next question, and that was, what is the current climate for buying and selling a business? And I'll add one component to that is not only what is the current climate, but do you find is that changing the terms and conditions, or the terms that either the buyer, I say maybe the seller, but probably more so the buyer might be looking for, given the current kind of uncertainty about the future, I suppose?
Well, okay. So I launched 2 new businesses to the marketplace 14 days ago, and launched them at the same time. When we launch a new business, we first reach out to the buyers that are already in our system under non-disclosure. We've got well over 1,000 of those folks that are already signed off non-disclosures, looking for businesses. And then we always give them the first kind of few days at it, and then 3 or 4 days after that, I put it out in our various marketing channels. One of those businesses has surpassed 100 inquiries. The other one's around 80 inquiries. Just to give you a sense, Chris's business, in the year that we had it up, we were around 60, I believe, 60, 70 inquiries, which again, good, healthy numbers, right? All those things. But that gives you a sense of just how active the marketplace is. I was telling Chris I was here till 9 o'clock last night at the office, and that is very rare for me. I embrace the fact that I'm not under 40 years old or 50 years old anymore, and I like to go home. But there's just that much work right now on my desk in terms of working with buyers and sellers. So it's a very vibrant market right now. It's quite interesting, and it's not just talk either. I have three transactions in due diligence right now. And for me, I average around 10 or so transactions a year. So to have 3 going at one time, that's a very healthy marketplace. And I've got 2 more offers that are being kicked around and close to being presented now. So it's very active right now. In terms of dependent on the company, what's going on with the company, we start to get in some dialogue about creative solutions around deal structure. So how we figure out how the business is going to be paid for with an uncertain future. So I was talking about that vacation property management business, and certainly with that one, where we've got a real tough year in terms of holidaying. And they're going to see a tough year this year. But the belief is, again, are you buying this for 6 months or 6 years, right? So we just look at some creative ways of putting together the transaction to protect the buyer a little bit from that what we anticipate will be a soft start. And at the same time, not forcing the seller to give it away, because I've got 3 sellers that say right now who all have been adversely affected by the pandemic. They say it's okay if I have to stay here longer, that's fine. So it's an opportunity for someone to buy it now, and we just put creative things into the way we structure the deal to help them get in now and not completely make the seller make a big sacrifice.
Well, that's encouraging that the market is that active. That's some good news. There's one more question came in, and this is a good question to end on, as I see we're almost at 12 o'clock. And that is, what are the top 5 things you would recommend a business owner do to get it ready for selling? You have like top 5 tips.
Number 1, remove yourself from being important in the business. Number 2, take a 2-week holiday. And I mean a holiday. Now, that doesn't mean your cell phone's on all day. I'll let you check in once every other day, tops. 3, remove yourself from being important in the business. 4, clean up your books. 5, systematize. So we had a bit of a real estate thing, right? Location, right? You know, make it a business. Don't make it your personal vocation, your personal project, right? That's how they start. I get that, you know, because you got to go there and you got to use all your energy and your wit and your brains and your chutzpah to go and start that thing. But once you get that snowball started, then make it easy for other people to continue rolling that snowball and let it go. And so you can step back a bit and watch.
Awesome. Well, that's some good advice for people to take away, whether you're a buyer or a seller. So Mike, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to join us today and share your wisdom, experience, and knowledge. It has been awesome for me, and I'm sure everybody on the call is going to walk away a lot wiser and hopefully either give you a call and say that they're ready, or at least spend the next 6 months or a year or whatever getting ready. So thanks very much. For people that are on the call, it is being recorded, so it'll be up on the website later on today if you want to rewatch it, or if you missed anything, you want to have a look back at it. Mike, how can people get in touch with you if they're interested in taking this to the next step?
Yeah, you can reach me at Mike at Chinook, CHINOOK, MABB, that's Mergers, Acquisitions, Business Brokerage.com. You can just say, or you can pick up the phone, 250-686-8308. Or if you missed all of that, just, you know, get a hold of Chris and he'll say, yeah, okay, I'll hook you up.
Okay, and I just popped the URL to the website in the chat there as well. Excellent. Well, thanks again, Mike, and thanks everybody for taking an hour out of your day to join us here on the call. And we wish you a wonderful SOHO day, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks so much, Chris. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mike.